The vast expanse of the galaxy stretched endlessly, dotted with stars, planets, and the silent echoes of civilizations long gone. The Galactic Empire, a force that had ruled for centuries, had never faced a true threat. Their dominion was uncontested, and their power was unquestioned. They had conquered countless species, swallowed whole star systems, and absorbed hundreds of cultures into their empire. But they had never met anyone quite like humanity. It all started with a small human ship, a simple scout vessel, drifting into Imperial space by accident. The ship was far from impressive, only a few 100 meters long and carrying a handful of explorers. They didn't expect trouble, certainly not from an empire so advanced, and they didn't know what they had stumbled upon. On board the ship, the crew was going about their usual duties when the communication systems flared to life. A voice crackled over the radio, speaking in an elegant, melodic tongue, full of authority. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering Galactic Empire territory. State your purpose." The crew exchanged nervous glances. The ship's captain, Captain Elena Kessler, took a deep breath and walked to the communication station. "We're a peaceful exploration crew. We've come to make contact." "We mean no harm," she replied, her voice steady. There was a long silence before the voice came back, this time more measured and formal. "Peaceful explorers, you say, and you come to make contact. Do you have the proper clearance for this territory?" The voice's tone shifted slightly, now tinged with a hint of suspicion. "We didn't know we were in your territory," Elena replied, trying to keep the calm in her voice. "We're just explorers, looking for new worlds. We're not looking for a fight." A few moments passed before the voice responded again, this time less threatening. "Very well. You will be escorted to the nearest Imperial station for review. Do not attempt to leave the area." Elena looked at her crew. They were all tense, unsure of what the future would hold. They had heard of the Empire, of course, but stories of its ruthlessness were always far from the truth, rumors told by those who either feared or envied its power. The ship slowly began to change course, guided by invisible hands of Imperial authority. As they approached the Imperial station, the humans could see the sheer size and magnificence of the station. Massive, like a mountain made of metal, hovering gracefully in space, it was far more advanced than any station the humans had ever seen. Their ship, in comparison, seemed like an ant in the shadow of a colossus. As they docked, a group of Imperial soldiers in elegant silver-plated armor awaited them. The humans, stunned but composed, were escorted out of their ship and into a grand, sterile hallway that smelled faintly of metal and ozone. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and overhead lights hummed quietly. At the end of the hallway stood a tall, imposing figure. He wore a regal cloak adorned with the Empire's symbol, his face obscured by a finely crafted helmet. He was the Emperor's envoy, his voice the will of the entire Empire. "You have entered Imperial space without permission," the figure said in a booming voice, one that seemed to reverberate through the room. "And yet, you claim you mean no harm." "We do," Captain Kessler said, stepping forward confidently, though her heart pounded in her chest. "We've traveled far to meet new civilizations. We wish to learn and exchange knowledge. That's all." The figure studied her carefully, his glowing eyes hidden behind the helmet's visor. "Interesting. You claim peace, yet we know nothing of your species. Perhaps we should learn more about you." Captain Kessler couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The room was silent as the figure's soldiers stood at attention, unmoving. "You must understand," the figure continued, his tone shifting slightly. "The Empire is not some naive group of settlers. We do not welcome foreign interference. If your people are as peaceful as you say, why have you come here?" "We came by accident," Elena answered, her voice unwavering. "We're just trying to find our place in the universe." The Imperial envoy remained silent for a moment, considering her words. Then he turned to one of his officers and gave a quick command. The officer nodded and left the room, returning shortly with a large data pad. "We will scan your ship for contraband and check your records," the envoy announced. "It will take some time." As the humans were led into another room to wait, Captain Kessler couldn't shake the feeling that they had underestimated the Empire. This was no ordinary power. They were more than just a galactic government. They were a civilization that had long known how to impose its will on others. And now, they were studying humanity. Alina's thoughts were interrupted by the soft peep of her communicator. She quickly activated it, only to hear the voice of her first officer, Commander Trent. "Alina, there's something you should know." Trent's voice crackled through the static. "There's a report from our home fleet. The Empire knows we've arrived. They're not just scanning us. They're making preparations." Kessler's stomach tightened. She glanced at the silent officers around her. Something was wrong. The Emperor's envoy had given them a cold reception, but now it seemed more like a warning. The message was clear, even if they hadn't realized it yet. The Empire wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to judge. And judging by their actions, humanity was about to be tested. The humans sat in silence, waiting in the cold, sterile room. The flickering lights overhead were the only sound in the otherwise quiet space. Captain Alina Kessler paced slowly back and forth, trying to calm her nerves. She had always been a leader in tense situations, but the presence of the Imperial Empire felt different. They were no ordinary power. They were ancient, vast, and ruthless. Her first officer, Commander Trent, stood by the window, staring out into space, his brow furrowed with concern. "This isn't good, Alina," he muttered, his voice low. "They're taking far too long to scan our ship. They're not just suspicious. They're preparing for something." "I know," Alina replied quietly. "But we can't act rashly. We have to show them we come in peace." Trent didn't reply, but his eyes were filled with doubt. He had seen too many wars in his time to believe in the idea of peaceful negotiations with a power like the Empire. He could feel the tension building, a storm waiting to break. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door opened. The same officer who had escorted them into the station earlier stood in the doorway, flanked by two others. They wore expressions of cold professionalism, but there was an unmistakable arrogance in their movements. "Alina Kessler, you are hereby summoned by the Imperial Council," the officer announced. His voice was devoid of warmth, but there was a sharpness to it that made the air feel heavier. "Is something wrong?" Alina asked, forcing herself to remain calm. "You will come with us," the officer replied, not answering her question. He turned sharply and began walking down the hall without waiting for her response. Alina exchanged a glance with Trent. "Stay sharp," she whispered. "We don't know what they're planning." The humans followed the officers through the twisting corridors of the station. Every hallway they passed seemed more grand and intimidating than the last. The walls were lined with strange alien symbols, glowing faintly in a variety of colors, and the floor was made of some kind of smooth material that reflected their footsteps like mirrors. Soon, they arrived at a large chamber, its walls adorned with golden statues of strange creatures, and a high vaulted ceiling. At the far end, seated on an elevated throne-like chair, was a tall figure. This one was different from the others they had seen. He wore elaborate robes with intricate designs, and his face was hidden behind a golden mask. Alina Kessler, captain of the human vessel Independence, the figure's voice boomed, seemingly filling the entire room. "You have entered Imperial space without permission, and yet you stand here, claiming to be peaceful. I am the envoy of the Empire, and I have been tasked with making a judgment." Alina stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest, but she knew she had to hold her ground. "We meant no offense. We didn't even know we were in your space. We are explorers, not invaders." The figure's mask glowed faintly, and Alina could sense his eyes narrowing. "You speak of peace, but your actions tell a different story. What is this exploration you speak of? Why should the Empire allow you to roam freely through our domain?" Alina opened her mouth to respond. But before she could, the Imperial envoy raised his hand, silencing her. "Your vessel has been inspected, and your intentions are clear," he said coldly. "You carry no weapons, but you carry something far more dangerous, your technology." The room seemed to grow even colder, and Alina's stomach dropped. She had known their technology was advanced, but she hadn't expected it to draw this kind of attention. "You humans think differently," the envoy continued, his voice almost sneering. "You build things that are not just tools but weapons in disguise. Your ships are not built just to explore, but to survive. Survive in hostile environments. Survive the unimaginable. You are not just explorers. You are survivors, and survivors make powerful enemies." Alina's mind raced. Was this the heart of the Empire's fear? They feared what humanity could do if pushed too far. It was true that humans had always been a resilient species, but that didn't mean they had come here to fight. Yet it seemed that the Empire saw something more, something dangerous in humanity's very nature. "We didn't come here to fight," she said, her voice firm, though her insides twisted with unease. "We came to learn, to explore. We want nothing more than peace." The envoy stood and stepped forward, his presence now towering over her. "You underestimate us, Captain Kessler. Do you truly think that we would allow your kind to wander unchecked in our galaxy? You are not the first to come here claiming peace, and you will not be the last. And once you have overstayed your welcome, you will learn the true power of the Empire." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. There it was, the threat she had been fearing. The Empire wasn't interested in peaceful contact. They saw humanity as a potential threat, one that needed to be controlled or eliminated. "This will not end well for you," the envoy added coldly. "You've made a mistake, human. The Empire does not tolerate outsiders. Consider yourself warned." As he spoke, the room seemed to darken, the golden glow from the statues casting eerie shadows across the walls. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The humans were no longer visitors. They were prisoners, trapped in a game they didn't understand. The envoy turned his back to them, signaling the end of the meeting. "Take them back to their ship. They will be escorted out of Imperial space, and should they return, we will have no choice but to destroy them." Alina and Trent were escorted back to their vessel in silence, the weight of the envoy's words hanging heavy in the air. They had barely made it out alive, and they knew it wouldn't be long before the Empire would come for them again. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding, it was a warning. Humanity had crossed paths with the Empire, and now it seemed the only option left was to prepare for war. The Independence was a modest ship by the standards of the galaxy, but it was sturdy, built to last, and designed for the long, lonely journeys of space exploration. As Captain Alina Kessler paced the deck, she tried to put her thoughts in order, but there was no escaping the truth. The Empire didn't just want to warn them, they wanted them gone. And if that didn't happen, they would strike. In the quiet hum of the ship, her crew was already preparing for the worst. Commander Trent stood near the command console, his face grim as he studied the data coming in from their sensors. "They're not giving us a chance to get out," he muttered to himself, the words barely audible. Alina moved to his side. "What do you mean?" "They've blocked our escape route," Trent explained, pointing to the galactic map on the screen. "The Empire's ships are moving into position around the edge of this sector. If we try to leave now, they'll be waiting for us." Alina's heart skipped a beat. She knew what that meant. The Empire wasn't just planning to push them out. They were setting up to destroy them. "We need to prepare for battle," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Trent looked at her, his expression hardening. "If we stay and fight, we're outgunned. But if we run, we risk triggering their wrath even more. Either way, we're in a dangerous spot." "We don't have a choice," Alina replied, her tone firm. "We'll make our stand here. Gather the crew. We need to make sure the Independence is ready for whatever comes next." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their nerves under control despite the mounting tension. Each one knew what was at stake. Not just their lives, but the future of humanity itself. As they prepared for the worst, the reality of the situation began to sink in. They were facing an enemy that didn't negotiate, didn't understand the concept of compromise. The Empire was ruthless, and it had already made its judgment. Hours passed as they completed the final checks on the ship's defenses. Alina stood at the bridge, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different reality. One where humanity's first contact with the Empire was peaceful, where they could learn from each other instead of fight. But that dream was slipping away, replaced by the harsh reality that humanity was now marked as an enemy. "Captain, we've got incoming." Trent's voice broke through her thoughts. "They've launched their fleet, and they're not just here to warn us. They're here to end this." Alina swallowed hard. Her hands clenched into fists. The Empire's ships were massive, impossibly advanced compared to anything humanity had. The Independence wasn't built for combat, but they'd have to make do. There was no going back now. Alina's mind raced. Was this the heart of the Empire's fear? They feared what humanity could do if pushed too far. It was true that humans had always been a resilient species, but that didn't mean they had come here to fight. Yet, it seemed that the Empire saw something more, something dangerous in humanity's very nature. "We didn't come here to fight," she said, her voice firm, though her insides twisted with unease. "We came to learn, to explore. We want nothing more than peace." The envoy stood and stepped forward, his presence now towering over her. "You underestimate us, Captain Kessler. Do you truly think that we would allow your kind to wander unchecked in our galaxy? You are not the first to come here claiming peace, and you will not be the last. And once you have overstayed your welcome, you will learn the true power of the Empire." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. There it was, the threat she had been fearing. The Empire wasn't interested in peaceful contact. They saw humanity as a potential threat, one that needed to be controlled or eliminated. "This will not end well for you," the envoy added coldly. "You've made a mistake, human. The Empire does not tolerate outsiders. Consider yourself warned." As he spoke, the room seemed to darken, the golden glow from the statues casting eerie shadows across the walls. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The humans were no longer visitors. They were prisoners, trapped in a game they didn't understand. The envoy turned his back to them, signaling the end of the meeting. "Take them back to their ship. They will be escorted out of Imperial space, and should they return, we will have no choice but to destroy them." Alina and Trent were escorted back to their vessel in silence, the weight of the envoy's words hanging heavy in the air. They had barely made it out alive, and they knew it wouldn't be long before the Empire would come for them again. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding, it was a warning. Humanity had crossed paths with the Empire, and now it seemed the only option left was to prepare for war. The Independence was a modest ship by the standards of the galaxy, but it was sturdy, built to last, and designed for the long, lonely journeys of space exploration. As Captain Alina Kessler paced the deck, she tried to put her thoughts in order, but there was no escaping the truth. The Empire didn't just want to warn them, they wanted them gone. And if that didn't happen, they would strike. In the quiet hum of the ship, her crew was already preparing for the worst. Commander Trent stood near the command console, his face grim as he studied the data coming in from their sensors. "They're not giving us a chance to get out," he muttered to himself, the words barely audible. Alina moved to his side. "What do you mean?" "They've blocked our escape route," Trent explained, pointing to the galactic map on the screen. "The Empire's ships are moving into position around the edge of this sector. If we try to leave now, they'll be waiting for us." Alina's heart skipped a beat. She knew what that meant. The Empire wasn't just planning to push them out. They were setting up to destroy them. "We need to prepare for battle," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Trent looked at her, his expression hardening. "If we stay and fight, we're outgunned. But if we run, we risk triggering their wrath even more. Either way, we're in a dangerous spot. We don't have a choice. Alina replied, her tone firm. "We'll make our stand here. Gather the crew. We need to make sure the Independence is ready for whatever comes next." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their nerves under control despite the mounting tension. Each one knew what was at stake, not just their lives, but the future of humanity itself. As they prepared for the worst, the reality of the situation began to sink in. They were facing an enemy that didn't negotiate, didn't understand the concept of compromise. The Empire was ruthless, and it had already made its judgment. Hours passed as they completed the final checks on the ship's defenses. Alina stood at the bridge, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different reality. One where humanity's first contact with the Empire was peaceful, where they could learn from each other instead of fight. But that dream was slipping away, replaced by the harsh reality that humanity was now marked as an enemy. "Captain, we've got incoming." Trent's voice broke through her thoughts. "They've launched their fleet, and they're not just here to warn us. They are here to end this." Alina swallowed hard, her hands clenched into fists. The Empire's ships were massive, impossibly advanced compared to anything humanity had. The Independence wasn't built for combat, but they'd have to make do. There was no going back now. The first wave of Imperial ships appeared on their sensors, streaking toward them like a pack of predators closing in on their prey. The size and power of the fleet sent a chill down Alina's spine, but she pushed the fear aside. They had no choice but to fight. "Helm, evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice calm but commanding. "Target their lead ship and fire everything we've got. We don't stop until they know we're not backing down." The Independence rocked as it fired its first volley, the ship's cannons unleashing a blast of energy that tore through the vacuum of space. It wasn't nearly enough to stop the Empire's fleet, but it was a warning shot. The humans weren't going down without a fight. The Imperial ships retaliated immediately, their weapons cutting through space with frightening precision. A laser beam slammed into the Independence, sending the ship shuddering violently. The hull groaned under the impact, but it held. "Alina, we can't keep this up much longer," Trent shouted, his hands flying across the controls as the ship swerved to avoid another strike. "Their weapons are far superior. We're taking too much damage. We can't retreat." Alina snapped, her eyes scanning the chaotic battle unfolding on the view screen. The Empire's ships were far faster and more powerful, but there was one advantage the humans had: unpredictability. The Independence wasn't built for combat, but the crew had a different kind of weapon: ingenuity. "Deploy the decoys," Alina ordered. "Full power to the shields. We'll buy ourselves some time." The crew worked quickly, launching a series of decoy drones into space, each one mimicking the Independence in shape and energy signatures. The Imperial fleet, momentarily confused, hesitated. For a split second, the human ship was able to evade another wave of fire, but the Empire was quick to adapt. Their ships regrouped and tightened their formation, trapping the Independence in a deadly vice. "Alina, this is bad," Trent said, his voice filled with desperation. "They're going to destroy us." But Alina didn't flinch. She wasn't giving up. She had one last trick to play. "Activate the phase shift drive," she said. Trent's eyes widened in disbelief. The phase shift drive was a technology humanity had developed in secret, a device capable of momentarily shifting a ship out of normal space, allowing it to reappear elsewhere. It wasn't perfect, and it took a lot of energy, but it was their only hope. As the ship's systems hummed to life, the Imperial fleet closed in, firing relentlessly. Alina braced herself for the inevitable impact. The ship's shields flickered, failing under the barrage, but just as the first strike was about to hit, the Independence disappeared, slipping out of real space. For a brief moment, there was only silence. Then, with a flicker and a hum, the Independence reappeared, 1,000 light-years away. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They had escaped, for now. Alina leaned back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. We bought ourselves time, but they won't stop. Not until they've destroyed us. Trent looked at her, his face grim. The Empire doesn't forgive. They'll be back, and next time, they'll be ready. Alina's gaze hardened. Then we'll be ready too. The Independence drifted through the empty void of space, its engines running on low power to conserve energy. The crew had barely escaped the Empire's grasp, but the damage was severe. The shields were down, the hull was scared from laser fire, and many systems were offline. But the worst part was the growing realization that the Empire wouldn't stop. They had shown mercy once, but it was clear now. Humanity had made a powerful enemy. Captain Alina Kessler stood at the bridge, her eyes scanning the quiet, dark space outside the ship's windows. The stars were distant pinpricks in the cold blackness. She couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision to fight. It was never supposed to go this far. They had come in peace, yet now they were at war with an enemy far too powerful for them to defeat on their own. "We need help," Alina muttered to herself. She had been running the numbers for days now, and the conclusion was always the same. The Empire's fleet was too advanced. Their weapons were too powerful. Humanity needed allies. Commander Trent walked into the bridge, his face a mixture of exhaustion and concern. "Captain, we've patched up the ship as best as we can, but we're going to need more than repairs if we're going to survive this." Alina turned to him, her mind already working through the possibilities. "We need to contact the Federation. If we can warn them, they might send reinforcements." "The Federation?" Trent asked, raising an eyebrow. "They've always been neutral. You think they'll risk angering the Empire for us?" "It's our only shot," Alina said firmly. "If they don't help, humanity won't last long against the Empire. We've made too many enemies by being here, and there's no turning back." Trent nodded, his face grim. "I'll get the communications officer on it. We'll try to reach them." The crew worked quickly, rerouting power to the communications array. But as the hours ticked by, Alina's hope began to fade. The Federation, if it even heard their call, might choose to stay out of the conflict. They had no reason to risk their ships and lives for a species they barely knew. Humanity had been alone for so long in the vastness of space that the idea of reaching out to others for help felt almost impossible. Just as she was about to give up, the communication officer called out from his station. "Captain, we've got a response. It's from the Federation." Alina's heart skipped a beat. She quickly moved to the communications console, her eyes fixed on the screen as the Federation's emblem appeared. A voice, calm and authoritative, came through. "This is Commander Celine of the Federation. We've received your distress signal, Captain Kessler. You are requesting assistance against the Galactic Empire." Alina took a deep breath. "Yes, Commander. We've made contact with the Empire, and they've attacked us. We're outgunned and outmatched, and we need help if we are to survive. The Empire won't stop until we're destroyed. Please, we need reinforcements." There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, Alina thought they were going to hang up, leaving them to face the Empire alone. But then Commander Celine's voice returned, steady and calm. "We understand the situation, Captain. The Galactic Empire is a dangerous force, and their actions are a threat to the stability of the galaxy. However, the Federation is bound by our neutrality agreements. We cannot take sides in this conflict unless it threatens the peace of the entire galaxy." Alina's hope faltered. "So, you won't help us?" "Not unless there's proof that the Empire's actions go beyond your conflict," Celine continued. "If the Empire has threatened the Federation, we will act. But if this is a matter between you and them, it is not our war." Alina's frustration boiled over. "So you're just going to watch while we're wiped out? Is that how the Federation works? Neutral until it's too late?" Celine's tone remained calm, but there was a hardness to it now. "You must understand, Captain, we cannot risk a full-scale war with the Empire. The consequences would be catastrophic for everyone involved. We need evidence that the Empire is a threat to all of us. Alina slammed her fist against the console. How much more evidence do you need? They attacked us first. They'll keep coming, and we won't survive unless you help us. There was silence for a moment before Celine spoke again. I understand your anger, Captain, but this is not an easy decision. We will send a small reconnaissance team to observe the situation. If we find that the Empire is indeed a threat, we will reconsider our position. Thank you, Alina said, her voice tight with frustration, but with a glimmer of hope. Please, don't take too long. We don't have much time. The communication ended, and Alina let out a long breath. She looked at Trent, who had been watching the exchange quietly. We'll have to wait and see, Alina said, but that's the best we can do for now. As they made repairs to the Independence, time seemed to stretch on endlessly. The crew worked in silence, each one knowing the danger they were in. The Empire was still out there, waiting, and no matter how much they tried to escape or hide, they knew that eventually the Empire would come back. And this time, they wouldn't be alone. The Federation had agreed to send a reconnaissance team, but that was no guarantee of military assistance. Even if they did find the Empire to be a threat, there was no way of knowing when or if help would arrive in time. But as Alina watched the stars pass by, a thought began to grow in her mind. What if the Federation never came? What if they were left to face the Empire alone? If the Federation refused to fight, humanity would have to fight back on their own. The Independence wasn't much, but humanity had one thing the Empire didn't: the will to survive. We'll make it through this, Alina whispered to herself. We have no other choice. The days that followed felt like an eternity for Captain Alina Kessler. The Independence drifted in the quiet depths of space, its crew working tirelessly to make the ship as ready as possible for whatever came next. But despite all their efforts, there was still an overwhelming sense of helplessness in the air. The Empire wasn't finished with them. It was only a matter of time before they returned. Commander Trent stood by the bridge's view screen, staring into the blackness beyond. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all centered around one simple fact. They were running out of time. We've been waiting for the Federation's team for days now, Trent muttered. If they were going to do something, they should have already arrived. Alina's eyes remained focused on the control panel in front of her. They're not coming, Trent, she said softly. We've made our request, but they're not going to risk war over us. Trent turned to face her, his expression hard. You really think the Federation will just ignore this? They can't afford to let the Empire grow any stronger. If they wait too long, they'll have no choice but to fight, whether they want to or not. Alina didn't respond immediately. She knew Trent was right, but that didn't change the reality of the situation. The Federation was a powerful force, but it was also divided by politics and its commitment to neutrality. Humanity was too small in comparison to the Empire, and even if the Federation did act, it could take too long to make a difference. Captain, the communications officer spoke up from his station, interrupting her thoughts. We're receiving a transmission. It's from the Federation. Alina's heart skipped a beat. She quickly moved to the communications console, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared for the conversation. Could this be it? Were they finally sending help? The screen flickered to life, revealing the same Commander Celine from before. Her expression was serious, her tone even more so. Captain Kessler, she said, we've received your message and have conducted our own investigation. The Empire's actions are far more dangerous than we first thought. We've reviewed the data, and while we still cannot commit to military intervention, we are sending a small fleet to your location. They will provide support in the form of reconnaissance, resources, and medical aid. Alina's breath caught in her throat. Support, she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. But what about reinforcements? We need military strength. We are sending what we can. Captain, Commander Celine replied, her voice unyielding. However, we cannot afford to escalate this further until we have full confirmation of the Empire's intent. This will be a small-scale operation. Do not mistake it for anything more. Alina clenched her fists at her sides. I understand, she said, her tone clipped. We'll take what we can get. The transmission ended, and silence fell over the bridge. Alina's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. The Federation was sending a fleet, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't what they needed to truly face the Empire. Still, she couldn't afford to dismiss the help. Every small victory mattered. What now? Trent asked quietly, as if reading her mind. We wait, Alina said. And in the meantime, we prepare. The Empire won't wait for us to catch up. Hours passed as the crew worked to finish their preparations. The Independence was as ready as it could be, but even with the added support from the Federation's small fleet, they were still outclassed by the Empire. The Empire's forces were a juggernaut, vast, powerful, and merciless. But humanity had one thing the Empire didn't understand: their resilience. The crew of the Independence were survivors. They had faced worse odds before, and they would do it again. But now, they had more than just their ship. They had something the Empire couldn't take away: hope. It was late into the evening when the alarms finally rang out, shaking the Independence with an urgency that sent the crew scrambling to their stations. Captain, the communications officer called out, we've detected incoming ships. It's the Empire. They've found us. Alina's heart pounded as she moved swiftly to the command seat. Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The ship lurched as it entered battle mode. The crew moved quickly, each one working in sync like a well-oiled machine. But Alina's mind was focused on one thing: survival. This isn't a drill, she said, her voice cold with determination. We're not running this time. We're going to fight. The view screen lit up with the sight of Imperial ships closing in, their massive forms casting long shadows across the stars. The Independence was no match for their size or firepower, but Alina refused to let that define their chances. Humanity had faced bigger odds before, and it had survived. Deploy the decoys, Trent called, his voice steady as he worked the controls. We'll need to distract them while we find a way to get to their command ship. On it, Alina said, tapping commands into the ship's system. The decoys flew into space, mimicking the Independence's energy signatures and throwing the Empire's fleet into momentary confusion. For a brief moment, the Independence seemed to disappear into the shadows of space, but the Empire wasn't fooled for long. Their sensors quickly locked onto the real ship, and before Alina could issue her next command, a wave of laser fire erupted from the Empire's lead ship, striking the Independence with powerful force. The ship shuddered violently. Alina was thrown forward, her head hitting the console with a dull thud. The crew scrambled to stay on their feet, but the impact had knocked out several of the ship's vital systems. Damage report. Alina shouted, her voice strained but determined. Shields at 30%, Trent called out. Engines are offline. We're drifting. The battle raged on outside, and the Independence was in danger of being torn apart. But Alina knew one thing: they weren't done yet. Alina, Trent said, his voice tense, we can't keep this up. We need to fall back. No, Alina said, her voice resolute. We're not running. Not anymore. We fight to the last. Outside the ship, the Empire's forces closed in for the final blow. The Federation's fleet was still hours away. They were on their own. And yet, even in the face of certain destruction, Alina refused to give in. The Independence wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's will to survive. And no matter what the Empire threw at them, they would never give up. The Independence groaned under the weight of the Empire's relentless assault. Outside, the stars were blotted out by the massive hulls of Imperial ships, their weapons firing relentlessly at the small human ship caught in their grasp. The Independence shuddered with each hit, its shields flickering dangerously low as the crew worked frantically to keep the ship together. Captain Alina Kessler gripped the edge of her command seat, her knuckles white with strain. The bridge was a whirlwind of activity as the crew scrambled to repair systems and return fire. The ship's weapons were powerful, but against the Empire's might, it felt like they were throwing pebbles at a mountain. "Damage report," Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Shields are holding at 15%. Trent's voice came back, tense. "But our weapons are nearly drained. We can't keep this up much longer." "Do we have any other options?" Elena asked, her mind racing. "Not unless we can find a way to disable their command ship," Trent replied. "It's the one directing their fire. Take it down, and their fleet might fall apart." Elena's heart sank. The Independence was a small ship, fast, but not heavily armed or armored. It was built for exploration, not for war. Yet here they were, fighting for survival against an empire that was intent on wiping them out. "We don't have the firepower to take down a command ship," Elena said quietly, her mind whirring. "But we don't have any choice. We have to try." "We're almost out of options," Trent agreed, his voice tight with stress. "But if we can pull this off, we might have a chance." A loud crash echoed through the ship, followed by the sharp hiss of the airlock systems. Elena's eyes widened. "They'd boarded us," she muttered. "Prepare for hand-to-hand combat." "Captain, we've just received a transmission," the communications officer called out, his voice frantic. "It's the Federation. They're coming to help." Elena's heart leaped in her chest. "How long until they get here?" "They're still several hours out," the officer replied, "but they've confirmed their fleet is on the way." A surge of hope sparked in Elena's chest, but it was quickly replaced by the grim reality of their situation. They were still alone. The Independence couldn't survive that long on its own. The Empire was determined to finish what it had started, and with every passing minute, the danger grew. "Helm, evasive maneuvers," Elena barked. "We can't let them board. We have to buy ourselves time." The Independence veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding another deadly barrage from the Empire's flagship. The ship trembled, but the evasive actions gave the crew a brief moment to regroup. "We've got incoming boarding pods," the sensor officer shouted. "They're trying to breach our hull." Elena's heart raced. The Empire was closing in. If they couldn't hold the ship together for a few more hours, all would be lost. "Commander Trent, take a team and get to the hangar," Elena ordered. "We can't let them take control of the ship." Trent nodded grimly. "Aye, Captain." He turned and began to gather a small team of soldiers, their weapons ready. The sound of boots hitting the floor echoed through the bridge as they prepared for the fight ahead. Meanwhile, Elena turned back to the battle unfolding outside. The Independence was fast, but the Empire's ships were far too powerful. Each strike sent ripples through the ship's structure, and every second the Independence remained exposed brought them closer to disaster. "We need to find a weakness," Elena muttered to herself. "Some way to hit back." Her eyes narrowed as she examined the readings on the screen. There it was, an opening. The command ship's shields were weak on one side. It was a small gap, but it was enough. "Trent," Elena called over the comms. "Get to the command ship's weak side. We have a shot at taking it down." "On our way, Captain," Trent responded, his voice determined. With a new sense of purpose, Elena braced herself for the next phase of their struggle. She had no illusions that this was going to be easy. Nothing in this battle had been easy, but it was a chance, the only chance they had. "Crew, prepare to fire everything we've got," Elena ordered. "We're going for their command ship. This is our only shot." The crew responded with a unified roar of agreement, their voices full of grim determination. They had already faced the Empire's wrath once before, and now they were going to make sure the Empire felt the sting of humanity's fight. The Independence hurtled through space, its weapon systems powering up for one final assault. The Empire's fleet was closing in, but the Independence was not backing down. The ship fired a barrage of laser blasts, striking the Empire's flagship with all the force they could muster. The command ship's shields flickered as the hits landed, but they held steady. "Full power to the engines," Elena shouted, gripping the armrests of her chair. "We need to get in close." The Independence surged forward, breaking through the barrage of enemy fire. The bridge rocked as the ship was hit, but Elena held firm. They were close now, so close to their target. The command ship loomed before them, its massive form like a dark shadow in space. The gap in its shields was still there, and Elena knew this was their moment. "Now," Elena shouted, her voice full of resolve. "Fire!" The ship's weapons fired with a deafening roar, the beams of energy slamming into the command ship's vulnerable side. The shields flared brightly before they collapsed under the intensity of the attack. The Independence was still under heavy fire, but Elena couldn't afford to think about that now. Direct hit. Trent's voice rang out through the comms. "We've breached their hull. Their shields are down." The Independence swerved out of the way as the Empire's flagship began to stagger. The Empire's forces tried to regroup, but without their command ship, their coordination was faltering. "We've done it," Trent shouted. "We've crippled their fleet." Elena allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. The battle was far from over, but they had just gained the upper hand. The Federation fleet was still on its way, but for now, the Independence and its crew had fought back. They had taken down the Empire's command ship, and with it, a piece of the Empire's power. But Elena knew this wasn't the end. The Empire would return, stronger and more determined than ever. And next time, they would be ready. The Independence drifted in the cold silence of space, its hull scarred from the battle. Captain Elena Kessler stood at the bridge, staring at the screens that displayed the Empire's crippled fleet. The Independence had managed to deal a powerful blow to the Empire's command ship, but the war was far from over. They had only won one battle, and Elena knew the cost of that victory would soon catch up with them. "Captain, the Federation fleet is in range," the communications officer called out, his voice filled with both relief and urgency. Elena nodded without taking her eyes off the screen. The Federation's fleet was small compared to the Empire's, but they were humanity's only hope right now. The Independence couldn't survive much longer on its own. "Put them through," Elena ordered. A moment later, Commander Celine's face appeared on the screen. Her expression was serious, though there was a hint of something softer in her eyes now. "Captain Kessler, we've arrived. We've received reports of your success. The Empire's command ship is down, but we know this is far from the end." Elena's voice was steady, though her exhaustion was evident. "Yes, the Empire will regroup. It always does. We've bought ourselves some time, but not much." Celine's gaze was firm. "We'll provide the support you need, Captain. The Federation fleet is ready to join the fight. Together, we can push the Empire back, but it will take time. This war won't be won overnight." "We'll need a plan," Elena said. "If we're going to win this war, we need to keep them off balance. The Empire is relentless, and they won't stop until they've crushed every last one of us." Celine nodded. "I agree. We've analyzed the data you sent us, and we believe the Empire is vulnerable right now. Without their command ship, their fleet is disorganized. But that won't last long. We need to strike before they have time to regroup fully." Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing through the possibilities. "We can't let them rebuild their fleet. We need to find their resources, factories, supply lines, shipyards, and hit them hard. If we can disrupt their production, we can slow their advance." "We'll coordinate our forces," Celine said. "We'll strike at their weak points, one system at a time." But just as they were beginning to plan their next move, the alarms blared again. The Independence shook as the screen flashed red, showing several Imperial warships coming out of hyperspace, their massive forms filling the screen. "They found us," the sensor officer shouted. "It's a full-scale counterattack." Elena's heart sank. The Empire was back. And this time, they were bringing everything they had. No more small skirmishes. This was going to be their last stand. "Get us out of here," Elena ordered, her voice tight. "Full power to the engines. We can't stay here." The Independence lurched as its engines flared to life, trying to break free from the incoming Imperial assault. But the enemy was too close, and the small ship was no match for the Empire's firepower. The incoming barrage from the Imperial fleet sent the Independence into a violent spin. The crew scrambled to stay in control, but Elena knew they couldn't outrun them. "We're not going anywhere," Trent said grimly, his eyes locked on the rapidly approaching Imperial fleet. "We've been cornered." A loud crash echoed through the ship, and Elena could hear the distant sounds of alarms in other parts of the ship. The Independence was taking damage. Serious damage. "Prepare for impact," Elena shouted. "Brace yourselves." The Independence was struck again, and the ship groaned as systems began to fail. Sparks flew from several consoles, and the lights flickered. The hull was buckling under the pressure. The crew fought to maintain control, but their options were running out fast. Trent moved quickly, his face hard. "We need to find a way to fight back," he said, his voice cold with resolve. "The Federation can't get here in time. We have to hold them off." Elena met his gaze, understanding the weight of his words. The Federation fleet was still too far away to make a difference, and the Independence was barely holding together. They were running out of time, and there was no escape. "We fight," Elena said, her voice fierce. "We've come this far, and we're not giving up now." The crew rallied around her, their fear and exhaustion pushed aside by the determination to survive. They had no choice but to fight back, to push the Empire as far away from humanity as possible. This was their moment, and they weren't going to waste it. "Launch the remaining fighters," Trent ordered. "We'll buy ourselves a little more time." The hangar bay doors opened, and the remaining fighter pilots rushed into their ships, launching into the void to engage the Imperial fleet. The Independence fired its remaining weapons, trying to take down as many of the enemy ships as it could. Each hit was a small victory, but the Empire's numbers were overwhelming. "This is it," Elena said quietly, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of the moment. "We fight until the end. We make sure the Empire knows we're not afraid." The ship took another brutal hit, and the lights flickered out completely. The crew moved in near darkness, their hearts pounding, their resolve unbroken. The Independence was on its last legs, but the fight wasn't over yet. Suddenly, a bright flash lit up the void of space, and the sound of blaster fire filled the bridge. The Federation fleet had arrived. "Elena," Commander Celine's voice crackled through the comms. "We're here. Hold on." The Federation fleet arrived just in time to engage the Empire's forces. It wasn't the end of the war, but it was a turning point. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Elena could see the beginning of a new hope. The Independence wasn't alone anymore. The Federation had come to their aid, and together, they would stand against the Empire. The war would rage on, but humanity had shown the galaxy one thing: they would never be wiped out. No matter what came next, they would always fight back.